everywhere. Lesson 15, Calamities. Alaska's Prince William Sound, a dazzling jewel in America's last frontier. The jagged coast of the unspoiled sound is dotted with coves and inlets, where fish spawn and otters and seals play. Along the shoreline, brown bears catch fish and deer forage for sea kelp. For years, the wildlife and marine life had the beauty of the sound to themselves. Then came the discovery of oil. In the late 1960s, huge reserves of oil were found in Prudhoe Bay on Alaska's northern Arctic coast. The state realized millions could be made by selling oil drilling leases. It didn't take long for drilling crews to move into the icy barren territory. In the late 1970s, an 800-mile pipeline was built to carry the thick crude from Prudhoe Bay to the southern port of Valdez. When the oil began to flow, huge ocean-going tankers pulled into the Valdez terminal. They loaded their cargo and then headed out through Prince William Sound. Environmentalists knew there was a potential for a massive oil spill. The state of Alaska and the oil companies who managed the pipeline grudgingly drafted a cleanup plan. They believed that a catastrophic spill in the Sound was highly unlikely. The oil companies said they had complete faith in their tanker pilots. But then the unthinkable happened in March 1989, and no one was prepared. It was a tragic case of Murphy's Law. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Joseph Hazelwood, captain of the Exxon Valdez, had a couple of drinks on shore with shipmates before boarding the tanker that Thursday night. Once inside his cabin, he drank 2 bottles of low-alcohol beer. He was scheduled to leave the port of Valdez in 45 minutes. Following routine, a harbor pilot came on board to steer the 987-foot tanker out of the port. About 2 hours later, the harbor pilot departed the ship. Hazelwood radioed the Coast Guard, saying he would move the tanker from the outbound shipping lane to the inbound shipping lane to avoid icebergs. He then gave control of the tanker to third mate Greg Cousins. Hazelwood returned to his cabin to finish some paperwork. For some reason, the Coast Guard no longer monitored the Valdez. Hazelwood had ordered Cousins to make a right turn back into the outbound lane when the ship reached a point near Busby Island. Cousins called the captain and told him when he was starting to turn, but it would be 7 minutes before the Valdez actually changed direction. A lookout spotted something wrong. He raced into the pilot house and reported a flashing red buoy near Bligh Reef was on the ship's right side, when it should have been on the left side. Cousins tried hard to turn the ship, but it was already too late. He picked up the phone and called Hazelwood. "We are in trouble." Hazelwood felt the jolt when the Valdez impaled itself on Bligh Reef. He rushed to the bridge and immediately slowed the engines. He tried to keep the ship from sliding off the rocky reef and capsizing. Hazelwood knew he couldn't prevent the inevitable, an oil spill, in the pure waters of Prince William Sound. He did try to minimize the size of the disaster. With its side split open, the Valdez spewed oil at the rate of 20,000 gallons an hour. Eventually, 11 million gallons would foul the Sound. According to the cleanup plan, emergency teams were supposed to be on the scene within 5 hours of the accident. In fact, it took 10 hours before even the first crews arrived. Worse yet, they could do little with their equipment. The oil booms and skimmers were insufficient. The barge that would carry the skimmed oil was damaged and couldn't be used until the next day. The Coast Guard was equally ill-prepared. Its closest cleanup ships were in San Francisco, 2,000 miles south of Alaska. Many marine animals were already in danger. Ducks were drenched in oil. Sea lions, their flippers coated with crude, were clinging to a buoy near the Valdez. As the oil slick snaked through the Sound, Exxon Corporation took over the cleanup operation. Local residents, angry and heartsick, accused Exxon of not moving fast enough. They didn't believe Exxon's efforts would protect the fisheries and save the rich wildlife. Commercial fishermen feared the upcoming harvest of salmon and herring would be ruined. Animal rescue centers were being flooded with sick, oily animals. Georgia Ruff, a local travel agent, took a leave of absence from her job to volunteer at a center. She learned to wash, dry, feed, nurse the otters. The animals' suffering became too much for her to bear. To hear those animals screaming in pain, it's just awful, Ruff said. The town of Valdez and other nearby villages came close to the breaking point. It was difficult for them to cope with the tragedy and adjust to all the attention from oil company officials, cleanup crews, and the media. In some villages, flags flew at half-staff. Some fishermen wore black armbands. They knew they would face financial hardship. By mid-May, the thick sludge had stained an 1,800 square mile area. Windy, stormy weather hampered the cleanup operation, which resembled a small army. Crews along the shoreline hosed down the slimy rocks with heated seawater. The progress was very slow. The crews had cleaned only 3,300 feet of beach so far, leaving over 300 miles of oil-covered shoreline to go. On the water, the cleanup wasn't any easier. Skimming ships had trouble pumping the oil from the surface because it was so thick. In a small village called Cordova, saddened townspeople stood in the rain near the waterfront one day and held a requiem for Prince William Sound. They could think of little besides the spill. They shared their grief, and some wept openly. The oil slick had already killed about 450 otters and almost 3,000 birds. A state environmentalist said people are going to have strong feelings about this for a long time. Every time people here go to a favorite fishing hole, they will think of the spill and they will be angry. Exxon fired Captain Hazelwood after receiving the results of his blood alcohol test. Many felt the company's action came way too late. Exxon knew Hazelwood had a long history of alcohol abuse, yet it still allowed the captain to command a tanker. Hazelwood went to trial a year after the accident, facing a felony and several misdemeanor counts. He was convicted of one charge, negligent discharge of oil. Jury did not believe Hazelwood was drunk at the time the Valdez ran aground. Who was to blame for the biggest oil spill in the history of the U.S.? After a long inquiry, it seems to be mostly Hazelwood. Also the Coast Guard and Exxon. Third mate Cousins was probably not qualified to steer the Valdez through the Sound. Captain Hazelwood should have been at the helm. The Coast Guard should have tracked the ship by radar. Exxon shouldn't have ignored Hazelwood's drinking problem. The Valdez crew shouldn't have been short-staffed and fatigued. Exxon spent billions of dollars to clean Prince William Sound, and it compensated the residents who lost income because of the oil spill. The company vowed to return to Alaska the following summer to pick up where nature's cleaning left off. 4 years after the spill, the blackened shoreline was bright again. Otters, ducks, birds, and shellfish were still being poisoned by oil buried in coves. Some species were failing to breed. Scientists who have researched the spill claim it will take decades for Prince William Sound to recover.